At 14:02 on November 14, 1944, in the dense, freezing shadows of the Vosges Mountains, Oberleutnant Klaus Weber felt invincible. Sitting in the forward passenger seat of an SD KFZ 251 half-track, he listened to the rhythmic clatter of the vehicle's tracks against the frozen French mud. He lit a cigarette, his gloved hands steady. To Weber, the American Amis were a broken force, hiding in the valleys below. He was protected by 5 tons of Krupp steel and an MG-42 machine gun that could sew a line of lead through any infantryman who dared show his face. In the next 40 seconds, Weber would be dead. 400 feet above the road, buried under a pile of rotted pine needles and shivering in a coat that hadn't been dry in 3 weeks, Corporal Silas Thorne watched. He wasn't holding a bazooka. He wasn't calling in an airstrike. He was holding a rusted lengths of winch cable and a worn felling axe. What Thorne was about to do flipped Army doctrine on its head. It was a maneuver explicitly forbidden by high command, a suicide tactic that ignored every page of the field manual. But Silas Thorne wasn't thinking about manuals. He was thinking about gravity. Before the draft board sent him a letter, Silas Thorne lived in the big timber country of the Olympic Peninsula, Washington. He was a high-lead logger. While West Point officers were learning about Napoleon's flanks, Thorne was learning how to drop a 150-foot Douglas fir on a dime, using nothing but a crosscut saw and an innate understanding of tension and compression. He spent his youth thinking in angles. He knew how to calculate the lean of a tree by eye and how to use a widowmaker, a dead branch, to clear a path. When he enlisted, his instructors at Fort Lewis were baffled. Thorne didn't care for the standard way of clearing obstacles with C4 explosives. He saw the world as a series of levers and fulcrums. They called him unorthodox. His sergeant called him difficult. They both missed the fact that Thorne saw the forest not as a battlefield, but as a machine. For 3 days, Weber's half-track had been a ghost in the mist. It sat on a ridgeline, an untouchable position that overlooked the only supply route into the valley. Standard doctrine called for a flanking maneuver, but the slopes were too steep. The cost of following the manual was written in blood. Private Leo Rossi, 19, from Brooklyn. He was killed by a single burst from Weber's MG-42 while trying to crawl up the slope with a satchel charge. He had a younger sister back home who had just sent him a pair of hand-knitted socks he never got to wear. Sergeant Hank Miller, 24, from Ohio, a veteran of North Africa. He died trying to range the half-track with a mortar. He left behind a wife and a 3-year-old son who only knew his father through V-mail. Captain Sterling, a man with starch still in his collar despite the rain, refused Thorne's suggestion to use a logging trap. "We are the United States Army, Corporal, not a band of Robin Hood's outlaws," Sterling barked. "You will wait for the armored reinforcements. That is the manual solution." But the reinforcements were 2 days away, and the men in the valley were starving. Thorne didn't wait. He observed a tiny flaw the West Point strategists had missed. The road beneath the half-track was undercut by an old drainage culvert. The anatomy of the cliffside was weak. If a massive weight hit the half-track at a specific downward vector, it wouldn't just damage the vehicle, it would take the entire road with it. He presented his plan, a deadfall abatis. He wanted to rig a 3-ton spruce log on a pivot, held by a hair trigger cable. "Do it, and I'll have you court-martialed for unauthorized field modifications and destruction of equipment," Sterling threatened. Thorne waited until the captain went to the command tent. Under the cover of a freezing sleet storm, Thorne went rogue. He moved alone, carrying a stolen Jeep winch and a heavy steel cable. He had no support, no radio, just civilian logic applied to a military nightmare. The smell of fermented pine needles and wet wool filled Thorne's lungs as he worked in the dark. Every clink of his wrench felt like a gunshot. He had rigged the spruce at a precise angle on the ridge. The physics was simple, yet lethal. Thorne had calculated the potential energy. Thorne didn't just drop a log, he unleashed a mountain. By rigging a 2,700-kilogram spruce log 12 meters above the road, he wasn't just using wood, he was using gravity as a weapon. He had calculated the potential energy, knowing that upon release, that timber would carry over 317,000 joules of kinetic force. That is the equivalent of a 5-ton truck hitting a brick wall at highway speeds. He didn't use a detonator, he used a rifle. From 480 yards away, through the biting mountain mist, Thorne lined up his Springfield M1903 on a single, strange tension wire. He exhaled, held his breath, and squeezed. The bullet severed the lead wire, and the 3-ton spruce swung in a 43-degree arc, striking the German half-track exactly 14 inches off the ground. The Krupp steel buckled like cardboard, the road collapsed, and the invincible machine was swallowed by the ravine. The logging trap neutralized the threat instantly. 12 German soldiers were killed or captured in the wreckage. The supply line was opened, saving the lives of over 200 American infantrymen trapped in the valley. In the aftermath, the Army didn't give Silas Thorne a Silver Star. They gave him a formal reprimand for misappropriation of engineering supplies. Years later, the abatis technique and advanced deadfall obstacles were integrated into Field Manual 5-15, credited to a committee of officers. Thorne's name was never mentioned. When the war ended, Thorne didn't stay for the victory parades. He hopped a train back to the Olympic Peninsula. He didn't talk about the Vosges. He didn't talk about Weber. He had trees to fell and a life to rebuild in the quiet of the woods. He was just a logger again. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories.